I've had the privilege of being in Israel 2 different times. And when you go to Jerusalem, they say it's a holy city. And it is different than other cities. When you go to Tel Aviv, it's like any other American city. It has its seedy parts. But Jerusalem is different. But the reason it's different is not because of the city. The city is just the city. But it's because of the people. And that's what makes a city holy, or a group of people holy, is because they are holy. It's not the town, but it's the people in the town. Yeah. And so, and it makes me think in Revelation when we see the holy city coming down, it will be full of only the saints, right?
Yes.
There won't be anybody else there. So it will be a holy city. But it is a different city, and it's you just have to go there to experience it. That's all I can say. But so God commands His people to be holy. Then we have a quote here from 1 Peter 1. As people who obey God, do not let yourselves be shaped by the evil desires you used to have when you were still ignorant. On the contrary, following the Holy One who called you, become holy yourselves in your entire way of life. Since the Tanakh says, you are to be holy because I am holy. Yes. And as I read through the commentary on this portion, there's so much stuff in there. There's just a lot of content when you really. This is a Torah portion that just has a lot of stuff in it. So consecrate yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. And so holiness isn't simply what you do. It's what it is. You're to be holy in what you eat, but it's in what you are. The one thing that makes me think of is absolutes. The world around us believes in absolutes, but only as it applies to some things. They don't believe in absolutes when it applies to morality or ethics.
That's right.
But when it comes to math and you put $500 in the bank, you kind of expect $500 to be there.
Isn't always so these days.
Well, it won't buy what it used to, but you expect it to be there. So there are some things that do not change. Although the world is winding down, there's one of the things we talked about in school this week is there's some research now showing that even the speed of light is slowing down. We've always looked at that as something that's totally fixed. And even with the rudimentary methods that they used years ago to measure it, even looking at that and the research they've done now, they say it's even slowing down. So the world is slowing down. It's coming to an end, really, as we know it. But so there are a lot of things in here that a lot of commands in this reading, and among them various gifts for the poor, love for every Jew, prohibition against sorcery, honesty in business dealings, and sexual morality. Revering parents, observing the Shabbat, prohibitions against idolatry, the obligation to burn leftover sacrificial flesh, the obligation to leave certain parts of one's harvest for the poor, not to lie, cheat, withhold wages, swear falsely, curse or mislead another. So what does this have to do with being holy? Well, the Torah teaches us what holy is. And, of course, the perception of those around us is that the Torah is legalistic, or legalism. But the Torah defines what is holy. God is showing us what is holy. And He asks us to be like Him because He is holy. So as we look at some of these, we see a lot more elements in here than just rules. We see compassion. And it's compassion for those who are maybe less fortunate, but also how we treat those who are more fortunate than us. To treat everyone the same.
Right.
So in the second aliyah, we're not to pervert justice, gossip, be indifferent to a fellow's predicament, hate a fellow Israelite, bear grudges, take revenge. to reprimand a sinner, and to love every Israelite. And the following statutes are also given here: not to sow a field with two different kinds of seed, wear a garment made of mixture of wool and linen, or crossbreed animals. So I have a question for you. Is a mule kosher? Not to even have one, is it? No. A mule is not kosher then, is it?
Because it's a crossbreed?
It's a crossbreed, yeah. And so it talks about even, sowing seed. There's to be a border between one field and another if there's two different kinds of seed in there, so that they're not drawing nourishment from the same bit of ground. And then it talks about wearing clothing containing both wool and linen. Prohibits us wearing that. And
What's the reason, do you know?
well, it has it set aside here. It's worn in the temple service, so it's set aside to be holy. So it's not so it's not something that's common. And planting together are different kinds of seeds. And here it talks about it here. The priest's girdle and the tzitzit, which every man wore, are preferably made from shanetz. Prohibition was a way of setting aside this fiber blend only for holy purposes.
Oh, okay.
So it almost, at first when you read it, it kind of seems like a contradiction, because you're not to wear it and the priest is wearing it, but it's for the priest. It's for a holy garment is what it's for. And so the rules against these mixtures are survivals of the clothing of the ancient Jewish temple, and they were just considered holy and forfeited to a sanctuary. Then it talks about a half-free maidservant, and to tell you to really study that, you really need to go to like the Chumash and really read the whole definition on that, because it gets pretty involved. It's talking about a servant who's owned by two different owners, and at least their interpretation of that. So it's something that we don't deal with in our culture. So you really have to kind of study it to really get a handle on that. So we are introduced, the third Aliyah, to the laws of eating fruit of a new sapling for the first 3 years, and to sanctify the fruit in the fourth year.
So what is that? What reason is that? Does it make the fruit better in the long run?
Well, what it says is that God will bless that tree. Why? I don't know. Maybe the tree needs that nourishment for the first couple of years. But God will bless it in its productive life and make it more productive if we follow what He says. And that's the whole thing with a lot of this stuff. Some of it we can understand, we can comprehend. Some of it we can't. And when we can't, we just trust God to know the difference. He knows. He is God. That always seemed like kind of a strange one to me for how many years you're not to, for 4 years you're not to eat the fruit, but in the 5th year you may eat the fruit. In this way your harvest will be increased. I am the Lord your God. And we're not to engage in witchcraft, prostitution, or tattoo our bodies.
Well, you should see that all over today.
Yeah. Yeah, we see a lot of tattoos. It always looks to me like somebody they forgot to wash. And my son called me Michael. It's in the Marines. He has a couple of tattoos. Guess what? He went in for a promotion, and guess what kept him from getting that promotion?
Tattoo?
Some of his tattoos, yeah, they weren't. If you had them before the ruling came out, you were grandfathered in. But guess what? He wasn't, and he hadn't gotten nailed on it before, so it wasn't documented in his records. So he had a pretty good lead on a promotion, but it kind of killed him. So.
Wow.
So and the reality is, a lot of jobs will affect you too.
And what branch of service? Marines?
Marines, yeah.
They're more strict, I think.
Well, I don't know, but anyway, didn't help him any, did it?
No.
But so men are not instructed not to destroy the edge at the hair at the edges of their scalp or the corners of their beards. We are commanded to observe the Shabbat, respect God's sanctuary, Torah scholars, and the elderly. Something we're really pretty weak on in our culture is giving honor to really our leaders, our elders, and the elderly. And we're commanded to love the Gerim, the stranger, the Gentile. And the stranger that sojourneth with you shall be unto you as the homeborn among you. And thou shalt love him as thyself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Yeah. And that's really, to me, that's really just speaking against pride, because when we start thinking we're better than somebody else, that's pride. And really, when we realize where we would be without God, none of us can have any pride, really. And so, and you know, the thing with all of God's holidays is just to remind us where we came from. We just got through Passover. It's to remind us, you know, came from Egypt, but we all came from sin, right? Egypt's sin. So, don't forget where we came from. So speaking about the one who has joined himself to the Jewish people and taken upon himself the Torah commandments, they were identified as the full proselyte. And then we go to the New Testament in Acts 2. They were staying in Jerusalem, religious Jews observing Shavuot, Pentecost, from every nation under heaven. Yes. When they heard this sound, a crowd gathered, and they were confused because each one heard the believers speaking in his own language. Totally amazed, they asked, "How is this possible? Aren't all these people who are speaking from the Galilee? How is it that we hear them speaking in our native language?" And if you were from Galilee, you were considered a hillbilly, I guess, in our terminology, because they weren't educated, they weren't up to snuff as far as the people of Jerusalem were concerned. They were just simple country folk. So they were fishermen and farmers, and how could they even know all these languages? And then it talks about Jews by birth and proselytes. And they were from really all over the known world at that time. And they were amazed at God using these disciples. And so a proselyte is one who has arrived at Judaism. A non-Jew has been circumcised and adopted the Jews' religion. In the Torah, however, we find that the word ger is used to refer to a stranger, a person from a foreign land who is living in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, a land that is foreign to him. And because we were strangers in Egypt. There's no question of a reference here to any sort of conversion or assumption of a new identity. So it's just somebody living amongst the foreign people. And Bruce obviously wrote this. He's been, over the years, he's personally been called out of the mainstream of Messianic Judaism because of the believing that the Torah is for everyone. I just read an article that my mother-in-law had given me, written by, I don't remember who it was from, but talking about the Hebrew roots movement, and it was going all over the wall with all kinds of stuff. It was kind of, I guess really the way I look at it is the closer you get to the truth, the more the enemy is going to try to divide you and pull you off in other directions. And there's all kinds of variations out there, but you know, there's only one of these. That's what I have to come back to.
Right, exactly.
And God speaks clearly through it, I believe. And I say that after many, many years of reading through God's Word. The more we understand God's Word, the more we see that things either fit or they don't. And we've been a part of this for a couple of years now, and it, quite honestly, it all fits together. Mm-hmm. And it all makes sense. The foreigner residing among you is also to celebrate the Lord's Passover in accordance with its rules and regulations. You must have the same regulations for the foreigner and the native born. So God doesn't see a difference between the two. The community is to have the same rules for you and for the foreigner residing among you. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You and the foreigner shall be the same before the Lord. The same laws and regulations will apply both to you and to the foreigner residing among you. So mainstream isn't always right.
No.
And if you really look at all the prophets, he's quoting Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, John the Baptizer, and Yeshua himself. We read the prophets, but you really go back into the setting that they were in, and quite honestly, you didn't want to be a prophet. It wasn't a very good career.
Didn't pay well, huh?
It didn't pay well, and you ended up in jail, and they did nasty things to you because you spoke the truth. And so if you compare our statement of faith with most mainstream Messianic congregations, you will find them virtually the same in the salvation-related doctrines. Virtually the same with non-salvation-related doctrines, few exceptions. Our one law position being one of them. So God's family is one. There are not two different sets of children with two different sets of rules. All the kids in our house follow the same set of rules.
Yep.
There's no discrimination between them. So one Torah. The Torah teaches us all how to live holy lives. Torah teaches us what sin is, and sin is the transgression of the law. And I want to read that verse. 1 John 3 and 4. Page 1526 if you're in the complete Jewish Bible. 1526. Clear at the end, right before Revelation. And everyone who has this hope in him continues purifying himself, since God is pure. Everyone who keeps sinning is violating Torah. Indeed, sin is the violation of Torah. So the Torah defines what sin is. And none of us like to be said that we're doing something wrong. So that's the enmity that I see, is the fact that it defines it. It clarifies it. And we're all sinners, so we're all in the same boat together, but we have a hope in Him. So do non-Jewish believers follow a different Torah than Jewish believers? And He only wrote one Torah. It's the same for everyone. So as people who obey God, do not let yourselves be shaped by the evil desires you used to have when you were still ignorant. On the contrary, following the Holy One who called you, become holy yourselves in your entire way of life. Since the Scriptures say, you are to be holy because I am holy.
Yes.
So who is Peter writing to? Jewish believers only? Or both Jewish and non-Jewish believers in Yeshua?
Yeah.
Therefore, remember your former state, you Gentiles by birth, called the uncircumcised by those who, merely because of an operation on their flesh, are called the circumcised. At that time had no Messiah. You were estranged from the national life of Israel. You were foreigners to the covenants embodying God's promise. You were in this world without hope and without God. And one of the promises that God gave to Israel, that if they followed Him in His ways, they would be a lender and not a borrower. And so it's a blessing to be a lender and not a borrower. And in dealing with some of that stuff this last week, it makes you a little more mindful of it all. And in Bruce and my discussions back and forth, one of the things Bruce has done just in this last week is he's taken care of all his arrangements. So if he passes away, it's all spelled out. And that's the best thing I can tell any of you is none of us know.
No, that's for sure.
And don't leave your loved ones in a pickle, I guess is the best way to put it. But take care of those things so that if you're not there, you don't leave a mess. And I'm working on that. I'm trying to clean up my mess at my house so my wife doesn't have to deal with it all.
Oh, good for you, Larry.
So,
It's going to take some more time, Larry.
yeah, it might. But we're working on it. Okay, but now, you who were once far off have been brought near through the shedding of the Messiah's blood. For he himself is our shalom. He has made us both one and has broken down the Mechitza, which divided us, by destroying in his own body the enmity occasioned by the Torah, with its commands set forth in the form of ordinances. He did this in order to create in union with himself, from the two groups, a single new humanity, and thus make shalom.
What's a Mechitza?
The Mechitza was a wall around the temple, and Gentiles were forbidden to enter. And so it's talking about a physical wall. And they have uncovered some of the plaques that were on it that said, do not enter beyond this point at the point of death. So it's talking about a physical wall. And but God's thing is to form from two groups a single new humanity and thus make peace. Shalom to you far off, shalom to those nearby. News that through him we both have access in one spirit to the Father. So then you are no longer foreigners and strangers. On the contrary, you are fellow citizens with God's people and member of God's family. So holiness in all aspects of your life before God. Even in business dealings. We are, one of the things that's said in the commentary is, if you use dishonest weights and measurements, God sees everything.
Right.
So you're almost denying the fact that he can see everything in a way, when you think that you can get by with it. And so we're to be honest and up front. Then the Torah describes capital punishment for one who worships Molech, a form of idolatry which required human sacrifices, babies. But the Torah also describes the punishment which would befall the nation if they neglect to punish those worshipers. So we're responsible to see that justice is done. The Torah sets punishments for individuals who curse their parents and those who engage in prohibited sexual relations. We are instructed not to follow the customs and traditions of the heathens, and we're reminded to be meticulous about eating only biblical kosher foods. The Torah portion ends with the same note as it started, that we be holy. So it ends with, I'm going to read that, Leviticus 20:26, the very tail end of that. Actually, I'm going to back up to 22. You are to observe all my regulations and rulings and act on them, so that the land to which I am bringing you will not vomit you out.
Yeah.
Do not live by the regulations of the nation which I am expelling ahead of you, because they did all these things, which is why I detested them. But to you I have said, you will inherit their land. I will give it to you as a possession, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am Adonai your God, who has set you apart from other peoples. Therefore you are to distinguish between clean and unclean animals, between clean and unclean birds. Do not make yourselves detestable with an animal, bird, or reptile that I have set apart for you to regard as unclean. Rather, you people are to be holy for me, because I am Adonai, am holy, and I have set you apart from the other peoples, so that you can belong to me. A man or woman who is a spirit medium or sorcerer must be put to death. They are to stone them to death, and their blood will be on them. And one of the things I enjoy reading through the commentaries. But there's a little thing in here, and I thought it was kind of made me stop and think. And it's talking about a Jew once came and lamented to Mordecai that his Russian landlord, with whom he had always had a very friendly relationship, had begun to hate him and was constantly persecuting him. The rabbi answered, "You should have maintained a distance between yourself and your landlord. You are a Jew and you have the responsibility of being holy. You wanted to be like him, so now he is separating himself from you." And I never really quite saw it in that light, but we're to be separate and holy. If we fail to do what God wants us to do, we become repulsive to those around us. And I've seen it happen in work situations where people have compromised. And you know what? There are people who are not Christians and not believers, but when they see somebody that's compromising, they don't want anything to do with it.
Oh, interesting.
And so there is to be that distinction. And
Because you can't tell where they're going to stand. When the situation arises, you don't know what they're going to do because what they say and what they do don't match.
And one of the things that also said in the commentary is the rabbis were saying, if you're going to serve the idols, serve the idols. If you're going to serve God, serve the God. But don't be a hypocrite and try to do both.